suppressive fire. At 5:32 a.m., Indian drones spotted a Chinese amphibious ship grounding on a reef. Minutes later, a precision missile from BRP Antonio Luna struck it mid-deck. Explosion, silence, retreat. By mid-afternoon on day 3, the ceasefire corridor in the Spratlys was holding, but barely. Naval blockades tightened, and unmanned systems loitered near combat exclusion zones. Yet, behind the diplomatic silence, the alliances were shifting. At 3:02 p.m., India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi chaired a high-level security meeting in New Delhi. Following intense deliberation with defense and foreign ministry officials, India issued an unprecedented statement. India recognizes the sovereignty of the Philippines over its maritime territories and will respond proportionally to any attack on its forces or partners in the Indo-Pacific. 3 words stood out: its forces or partners. 10 minutes later, satellite data confirmed that the INS Vishakhapatnam and INS Shivalik, escorted by 2 logistics ships, had crossed into the Philippine Exclusive Economic Zone, anchoring at Subic Bay under full operational readiness. India had entered the war. At 4:04 p.m., 2 Russian Tu-160 Blackjack bombers, escorted by Su-35s, crossed the South China Sea via the Sulu archipelago. Their flight path was deliberately provocative, cutting within 100 kilometers of Palawan airspace. The aircraft did not engage, but they didn't have to. Russian state TV broadcast the flight path live, showing onboard camera footage of warheads marked courtesy of Moscow. This was no longer just about China. It was about Moscow's shadow creeping into Southeast Asia. Meanwhile, Russian naval elements, including the destroyer Admiral Panteleev, were detected crossing into the Philippine Sea from the East China Sea. Although not yet part of a battle group, the trajectory was unmistakable. A new axis was forming: China-Russia, shoulder to shoulder. At 5:10 p.m., a Philippine P-3 Orion surveillance aircraft detected multiple launch signatures from Mischief Reef. Target: India PH naval assets clustered west of Subic. 5 minutes later, 2 Chinese YJ-83 anti-ship missiles streaked through the sky. One was intercepted mid-air by a Philippine Spider missile system positioned inland at San Antonio. The second slammed into the forward hull of a Philippine Navy auxiliary ship, BRP Datu Sanday, killing 4 crew and triggering a fire that raged for hours. India responded swiftly. At 5:28 p.m., a BrahMos missile was launched from a mobile coastal battery in Palawan. It struck a Chinese radar platform on Mischief Reef, creating a domino effect that shut down the reef's long-range targeting capabilities for at least 12 hours. Modi's defense minister said on record, "The rules of restraint do not apply when the blood of our allies has been spilled." While the Spratlys burned, another crisis unfolded to the north. Chinese amphibious craft began massing near the Bashi Channel, a narrow but crucial choke point between Taiwan and Luzon. Filipino radar near Cagayan and Indian P-8I aircraft stationed at Subic confirmed at least 6 PLAN vessels operating just outside exclusion zones. Then, at 6:19 p.m., a Chinese submersible drone entered Philippine waters undetected, only to be ensnared by a mine net deployed earlier by the Philippine Navy. The retrieval revealed a stealth-capable reconnaissance drone armed with mini torpedo pods. China claimed it was a rogue commercial research vehicle. No one believed it. The Philippines increased naval patrols across northern Luzon. Taiwan raised its alert level to DEFCON 2, the highest since 1996. And India? It deployed additional Poseidon aircraft to blanket the area with sonar buoys. The Bashi Channel was now a boiling point. At 7:03 p.m., disaster struck. A volley of CJ-10 cruise missiles, launched from a Chinese submarine near Fiery Cross Reef, tore through Kalaya and town proper on Pag-asa, Thitu Island. Civilian structures were hit. A school, a medical outpost, and a military barracks took direct hits. At least 11 dead, including 2 children. This wasn't a skirmish anymore. It was a war crime. President Marcos Jr., visibly shaken, addressed the nation at 7:45 p.m. China has chosen the path of terror. This was not a strike on soldiers. This was a strike on families, on innocence. The Republic will answer. India's Prime Minister issued his own statement within minutes. The Philippines will not stand alone. India stands beside her, on land, at sea, and in the air. The Quad leaders held an emergency call. The room was divided. Australia and Japan preferred containment, but the United States and India argued for escalation. Eventually, a joint resolution passed. Expanded air patrols and ISR integration would begin at dawn. India and the Philippines launched their first joint naval strike operation of the war, Operation Sea Viper. Mission: disrupt the Chinese naval supply routes between Subi and Mischief Reefs and re-establish control of maritime lanes west of Palawan. The task force included INS Chennai destroyer, BRP Jose Rizal guided missile frigate, INS Shivalik stealth frigate, 3 Philippine MPACs fast attack boats, Indian UAVs providing loitering surveillance from Palawan. By 8:34 p.m., the formation made contact with 2 Chinese militia trawlers and 1 Type 056 corvette. When challenged via radio, Chinese vessels responded, "Turn back or be destroyed." These are sovereign Chinese waters. Then, at 8:46 p.m., Sea Viper made the first move. A barrage of Spike ER and BrahMos mini-cruise missiles was fired, crippling the Chinese corvette's radar and forcing militia ships to scatter. The corvette retaliated, but was overwhelmed. Naval superiority, at least temporarily, belonged to India and the Philippines. The calm before the storm never lasted long in this war. At 8 p.m., the armed forces of the Philippines, in coordination with India's Strategic Forces Command, initiated a targeted precision strike package under the operation name Ark of Iron. Objective: expand the denial zone surrounding Palawan by neutralizing radar relays and fire control systems across Fiery Cross Reef and Caguitingan Reef. The strike package consisted of 2 BrahMos cruise missiles launched from Palawan's San Vicente Battery, 1 BrahMos-A air-launched variant fired from a modified Indian Su-30 MKI escorted by Philippine FA-50PH fighters, coordinated EW jamming from a mobile unit deployed in Zambales. At 8:08 p.m., the missiles hit with terrifying precision. The fiery cross target, a Chinese radar platform, was obliterated. Caguitingan's sensor dome was split in half, rendering it offline for the next 12 hours. For the first time in the war, both BrahMos land and air variants had drawn blood in the same hour. China's foreign ministry declared it an act of escalation manufactured by foreign interference, alluding to India's deepening role in Philippine operations. But there was no time for rhetoric. Suddenly, radar signatures lit up west of the Sulu Sea. A Russian Tu-22 M3 backfire bomber formation, escorted by Chinese J-16D fighters, was detected heading southward from Hainan, crossing into the Philippine ADIZ. Russia had entered the conflict with firepower. At 9:17 p.m., the bombers launched KH-32 supersonic anti-ship missiles, targeting a suspected Philippine Navy logistics convoy near Balabac Strait. 2 vessels, a civilian tanker under military escort, and a logistics corvette were hit. 9 fatalities. Fuel caught fire and spread across open water. It was the deadliest Russian strike yet in the South China Sea theater. India responded immediately. INS Kolkata, stationed in the Sulu Sea, locked onto a trailing Il-38 surveillance plane, shadowing the bombers. At 9:33 p.m., it fired a Barak 8 missile, downing the Russian asset. It marked the first India-Russia military kill in modern history. Moscow issued a statement of deep regret over Indian hostilities, while activating Pacific Fleet cyber forces for rapid retaliation. You see, the war above the clouds was just as intense as the one below. At 10 p.m., 2 Indian RISAT satellites and a Philippine Dewata-2 Earth observer lost signal simultaneously. It wasn't a coincidence. China had launched a co-orbital anti-satellite maneuver. A satellite in low Earth orbit emitted directed jamming beams, causing blinding interference across Philippine and Indian surveillance networks. By 10:12 p.m., Indian cyber units retaliated with a digital blindfold, a precision attack that scrambled the guidance relays of 3 Chinese ISR satellites over the Spratlys. Then came the spark. Philippine hackers, trained under Project Resilient Archipelago, breached a Chinese maritime database and exposed naval asset locations near Reed Bank. They posted it publicly. Revenge by transparency, they called it. And here's where it gets complicated. At 11 p.m., a massive Chinese-Russian maritime task group was spotted converging on Reed Bank, with 14 warships in formation, 5 Chinese destroyers, 2 Russian Udaloy-class frigates, 7 support and resupply ships. Their target, secure energy-rich maritime zones between Palawan and Spratly Islands, an area critical to Philippine sovereignty and also to China's broader energy strategy. India and the Philippines anticipated the move. Operation Iron Triangle was activated. 3 Philippine impacts armed with Spike ER missiles, INS Kochi, and BRP Jose Rizal, coordinating radar coverage. Indian P-8I Poseidon aircraft deployed with active sonar buoys to track submarines. A classic naval pincer was in motion. At 11:43 p.m., the first confrontation occurred. A Philippine multi-purpose attack craft engaged and disabled a Chinese Type 22 stealth missile boat attempting to flank the formation. The Chinese group paused, but the message was clear. Reed Bank was not theirs for the taking. As the clock struck midnight, India made its boldest move yet. Prime Minister Narendra Modi appeared on a national broadcast. Calm but resolute, he said, "India stands by peace, but not passivity. An attack on our allies is an attack on us. The time for hesitation is over. India will uphold maritime freedom in the Indo-Pacific." Moments later, India officially invoked Indo-Pacific Security Protocol 23, a legislative maneuver allowing the use of expeditionary assets without full war declaration. At 12:05 a.m., 4 Indian Sukhoi Su-30 MKI fighters scrambled from the Andaman Command and entered Philippine airspace under full electronic support. Their mission: enforce air denial zones around Palawan. Meanwhile, India's INS Vikramaditya carrier group moved through the Malacca Strait under radar silence, bound for the West Philippine Sea. The war, which began its second time as Shoal, had now evolved into a full-spectrum, multilateral conflict. You see, the night skies over the South China Sea had never been this loud. At 1:04 a.m., dozens of fast-moving radar pings blanketed the waters around Scarborough Shoal. Philippine Navy radar operators on board the BRP Andres Bonifacio stared at their screens in disbelief. A swarm, not 1 or 2, but over 60 combat drones, launched simultaneously from Chinese stealth barges northeast of Hainan, were racing toward the disputed shoal. Experts identified them as the WL-2 variants, capable of loitering for 10 hours and carrying dual mini-missiles. China was testing a new doctrine: drone saturation and siege. But the defenders weren't asleep. India had pre-positioned 2 Nagastra, 2 interceptor drone clusters in Zambales. As the swarm approached, the interceptors took off in coordinated formation, deploying anti-drone nets and electro-pulsed rounds mid-air. By 1:25 a.m., 22 Chinese drones were neutralized before reaching Philippine airspace. The rest, they began kamikaze dives on nearby coral platforms, trying to deny them for future use. Scarborough survived the swarm, but only barely. Then came the twist. At 2 a.m., a joint reconnaissance sortie by an Indian P-8I Poseidon and a Philippine Hermes 900 UAV picked up unusual thermal signatures southwest of Reed Bank, hidden under fishing trawlers and cargo hulls. They had found it, the so-called Shadow Fleet, a cluster of unmarked maritime militia vessels, moving in silence but carrying radar jammers, comms interceptors, and rumored anti-air platforms. This was China's gray zone gambit, meant to operate under the radar, both literally and diplomatically. But this time, there would be no warnings. At 2:14 a.m., 2 BrahMos NGs launched from INS Shivalik streaked through the sky, coordinated with Philippine anti-surface missiles fired from Impact Mk3s stationed north of Palawan. 2 shadow vessels erupted in flame, the rest scattered. That's when Beijing's warships reactivated their weapons radar. Meanwhile, hundreds of kilometers away, another game was unfolding. At 3 a.m., satellite surveillance over the Malacca Strait revealed that China had deployed 4 Yuan-class submarines, trying to sneak past Indian sonar nets. Their goal? Sever the Quad's Indian Ocean logistics chain, a move that could tip the war. But they weren't alone. India's INS Arihant, a nuclear-powered sub, had been waiting in silent vigil. So had a RAAF P-8A Poseidon, monitoring the entire corridor from above. At 3:28 a.m., the first underwater clash occurred. A lightweight torpedo, launched from Arihant, struck a Chinese sub's propeller shaft, disabling it. The other subs turned tail, releasing countermeasure bubbles before fleeing east. It was India's way of saying, "You shall not pass." At 4 a.m., ASEAN leaders convened again in an emergency virtual summit. Singapore, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Indonesia joined Japan and Australia in pleading for a 48-hour ceasefire, hoping to stave off further escalation. But two key players were missing: China and Russia. Even as the screen showed empty chairs labeled Beijing and Moscow, their fleets kept moving. Chinese aircraft buzzed Taiwanese airspace. Russian bombers repositioned north of Luzon. It was clear diplomacy had taken a back seat, yet the Philippines didn't flinch. President Marcos, addressing ASEAN Live, said, "We will fight until our shores are safe. We will not trade peace for submission. We ask for support, not sympathy." The statement was echoed, word for word, by India's ambassador. The message: resistance was regional now. This wasn't just the Philippines' war anymore. And finally, at the edge of dawn, the storm came. You might not know this, but storms in the West Philippine Sea aren't just natural. They're strategic. At 5 a.m., under heavy monsoon rains, a Chinese-Russian amphibious group began a wide arc toward Reed Bank's southern rim. Satellite imagery showed over a dozen craft: Chinese Type 71 LPDs, Russian Rapucha-class landing ships, supply barges masked under fishing boat signatures. This was it, the full frontal attempt to land troops on disputed, energy-rich zones. But India and the Philippines had prepared. As the flotilla closed in, INS Vikramaditya's air wing launched. Tejas fighters roared into action, accompanied by Philippine FA-50s. Meanwhile, long-range artillery from Palawan's coastal batteries opened up, saturating the seaway with suppressive fire. At 5:32 a.m., Indian drones spotted a Chinese amphibious ship grounding on a reef. Minutes later, a precision missile from BRP Antonio Luna struck it mid-deck. Explosion, silence, retreat, for now. By the time the sun rose fully over the Philippine archipelago, the sea had grown quiet, but not calm. Day 4, casualty report: Philippines, 18 killed, including 6 civilians. 2 naval ships damaged. India, 1 Il-38 surveillance loss. 4 wounded in drone collision. China and Russia, estimated 3 naval vessels hit. 1 submarine disabled. Over 30 drones lost. 1 failed amphibious landing. The 4th day ended without surrender, but not without scars. It all started with a water cannon strike near 2nd Thomas Shoal. That single incident triggered a multilateral escalation, dragging India, Russia, and the Quad into a full-spectrum conflict. And yet, no side holds absolute advantage. The Philippines still holds 2nd Thomas. India dominates sonar coverage and cruise strike zones. China retains control of multiple reefs. Russia now casts its shadow from the north. But the line has moved from 2nd Thomas to Scarborough, to Malacca, to Reed Bank, and maybe, soon, to Taiwan. And here's the thing: this isn't the end. It's the end of the beginning.